The selfish people on earth, the Ik people. In the 1970s, the New York Times described the Ik as a haunting flower of evil in its corner of civilization's garden. The vilification didn't start or end there. The physician and science journalist Lewis Thomas in 1973 argued that the unremitting, compulsive repellence of these unattached brutish creatures was the result of an exploded culture, in which each Ik was a one-man tribe. It was widely argued that the Ik revealed how humans are essentially malicious when stripped of the constraining effects of decent civilization. They exemplified how little natural goodness lies at the bottom of the human heart by the author of a New York Times article, Christopher Lehman-Opt. The Ik were first portrayed as the loveless people and as unfriendly, uncharitable, inhospitable, and generally mean as any people can be by Colin Turnbull, who was a London-born anthropologist who studied them from 1964 to 1967. In his book, The Mountain People, firstly published in 1972 and still available, Turnbull argued that the selfish behavior that he so vividly described, including desertion of children and mistreatment of the elderly and the weak, was due to their cultural adaptation to conditions of scarcity. In his most hateful excesses, he claimed that they behaved in ways that it would be an insult to animals to call bestiality. But the vilification of the Ik people cannot simply be ascribed to Turnbull being racist, at least not entirely. Yes, a paternalistic form of racism shows through most directly the advice that Turnbull seems to give to the Ugandan government, which amounts to advocating cultural genocide. He found that the Ik behavior and the Ik culture were so morally repugnant that he advocated that they be forcibly and randomly taken to parts of Uganda sufficiently remote for them not to be able to return to their home, as a way of eliminating the cultural traits, including their language, that he believed led them to be so selfish. Turnbull's argument is that the Ik culture had become so selfish due to an adaptation to the conditions of scarcity, and that is how the Ik became selfish in popular reputation. That is why the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins uses them in his book, The Selfish Gene, as an example of selfishness. That is how, in The Age of Sharing by the sociologist Nicholas Jones, the Ik were described as living in a state of distrust and discord, and that is in general the account that we know about the Ik people. But such account is at the very least uncritical. Turnbull himself didn't have long-term experience with the Ik, and there were no other researchers working in the area who could corroborate his story. Even today, only a very small amount of linguistic and anthropological research has been done with the Ik community because visiting this remote and insecure part of the world is very challenging. Yet, we do have to assume that Turnbull saw something, that something in his account is at least real. But we also have to understand why Turnbull saw what he saw. Ik conventional wisdom tells them that one couldn't survive without sharing. They call it Tomora Maran, and it's an Ik adage, meaning it's good to share. The dry hunger season in Ikland is a time when people must come together to help each other by sharing foods with the most in need. The Ik also face a constant threat of violent attacks by raiding warrior groups. And as unarmed and habitually peaceful people, the Ik are largely defenseless against those attacks. The only defense is to rely on one another for help. It is the duty of men to band together to defend an Ik village from an attack, while women must lead the escape of precious children to the relatively safe hiding places of their choices on the mountain slopes. It is also important to the Ik that in these escapes, the injured and the vulnerable are tended to and guided. They even have a ritual dance in which they mime and demonstrate the appropriate helping behavior during an enemy attack, so everybody can practice it. Furthermore, the Ik believe that the landscape is inhabited with spirits called Kijawik, which literally means children of the earth. They are also believed to bring misfortune to individuals who fail to share with others and to reward those who are especially generous. So why have we this account of the Ik people as so selfish? Well, let's go back to 1965, 1966. And let's go exactly to that time, because the Ik had been gradually forced out of territory in what is today parts of Uganda, Kenya, and South Sudan, including their primary hunting ground in the Kidepo Valley, which had been turned into a game reserve by the British colonial government in 1958. And this made it much more difficult for the Ik people to acquire food, and on top of that, a severe drought hit. During Turnbull's visit, famine led to the deaths of several Ik, especially children and elders. And we have to take into account then that if those were the conditions, a diminished cooperation is just a tragic fact of life that can occur and does unfortunately occur in all societies when they are hit hard by a prolonged famine. Therefore, the evidence that indicated this selfish behavior to Turnbull were just a byproduct of famine and not a cultural adaptation to conditions of chronic scarcity. And this is not just something that would occur in some so remote society. We need to think about the Irish potato famine of the late 1840s and what that brought about, aka, for instance, cannibalism and cases of cannibalism, documented cases of cannibalism, for us to understand that every society, when they are hit hard by a famine, would react in certain ways to guarantee basic survival. And therefore, when we read those comments and those observations, we should be wary of the myth of selfishness. Stressing the role of competition in evolution over that of cooperation is not a sign of hard-headed objectiveness. It is a sign of biased magical thinking that can lead us seriously astray. But unfortunately, a great deal of our society think that selfishness is the key to be successful, amazingly so. And on that, there will be a lot to comment, but I'll leave the comments to you guys. And if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll talk soon. Bye.